Hello everyone, thank you all for coming. My name is Jennifer Remenchik and I am a member of the exhibitions team here at Brand. Art Talk Tuesdays is an initiative of the Brand Library and Art Center in which we invite contemporary artists from Glendale and the greater Los Angeles area to discuss their work and the issues that surround it, followed by a moderated discussion with me and a public Q&A. This program is free and open to the public. I would like to take a moment to thank my many team members who help support this program: Kaylee Cannon, Chloe Kors, Stacy London, Stephanie Sherwood, and Blair Whittington. Artist Hayley Barker weaves the personal with the natural world into her landscape paintings. Treating the garden as an altar, she has developed a practice in which her relationship to tending her intimate landscapes is echoed in the evolution and making of her paintings. Lightly layering oil paint on linen, Barker works with subjects that are near and dear: her garden, altars around the home, and her studio, her childhood home's yard, the river in Oregon she returns to every summer. Hayley Barker has had solo exhibitions at Night Gallery Los Angeles, Shrine in New York, CVG Foundation in Beijing, and Bozo Mag in Los Angeles. She has participated in group shows at Aquavella, Harper's, Nicodeme, Night Gallery, and Shrine, among others. Barker has been featured in several publications, including Art Forum, Artillery Magazine, Bomb Magazine, Forbes, Hyperallergic, Juxtapose, LA Weekly, and W Magazine. Her work belongs in the collections of the Columbus Museum of Art, CVG Foundation in Beijing, Institute of Contemporary Art Miami, Oregon State University, the University of Iowa Stanley Museum of Art, and the Yagyo Foundation in Taiwan. Barker lives and works in Los Angeles, and I'm very happy to introduce her right now. Let's give her a hand.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was such a generous introduction. And with your thank yous, I would like to thank all of you for coming, especially my sweet partner Tim and my friend Amy and my studio crew, or most of it, Siobhan Fernari and Eric Jones. Thank you. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to time myself. And tonight I want to talk a little bit about, I'm going to start by talking about my influences in my work, and then more specifically about the paintings. And if at any time I veer away from the mic and you can't hear, just like, do this thing. And, just briefly before I get into it, I thought I'd share just a little bit about my path to painting, because it's kind of a maybe different one than some. I started drawing and painting when I was a little kid, and started doing it a bit when I got to college, but then I swiftly moved to doing performance art. It was the 90s. Seemed more vital. And then I returned to painting in the early 2000s, and that's where we find us now. So, I wanted to talk specifically tonight about the theme you see here: developing intimate yards, landscapes, and altars through paintings. And, I guess the questions that I'm always asking myself are, like, what is sacred? Where is the sacred? How do we interact with the sacred? What are the spaces in which we create opportunities to interact with the sacred? And I'm also interested in, spaces of communion with nature, and spaces to sort of interface with the mysteries of the earth, which is the sacred to me. So I'll get there. I'll talk more about that. But I wanted to start with Charles Birchfield, who was really one of my first influences. Charles Birchfield was an American artist, and I thought I'd read you a little quote because they just came out with this beautiful edition that's sort of an edit of his very, very, very vast diaries. So this is a nice way to start. It's edited by Ben Estes, and it came out by the Song Cave quite recently. So this is from February 8th, 1938, and he writes, "When I look at the sketch I worked on Saturday and Tuesday and note how I achieved a certain sort of freedom in it, former nature studies seem inhibited. And even this one is perhaps a little too self-contained. I think, oh, when will I ever really let myself go and express the tremendous force of nature? Or will I die at last without having done so? But the vital force must be within me. I like to think of myself as an artist as being in a nondescript swamp, alone, up to my knees in mire, painting the vital beauty I see there in my own way, not caring a damn about tradition or anyone's opinion." And that stood out to me. I kind of can relate to that in every way. Charles Birchfield worked from his backyard primarily as an adult and did all of his nature studies in his hometown, like within walking distance from his place. This is one of his sketches representing hypnotic intensity. And here's one of his paintings. His abstract conventions, or his conventions for abstract thought, which this was one of, are things that he sort of inserted into his paintings. Something that drew me to his work initially was his desire to express the vibrancy in all of life and matter. And, I encountered his work in a book. I'm from Salem, Oregon, and I found a book of his paintings when I was in high school and just used to literally go to the library and put the book on the floor and look at it for hours and hours. This was the kind of kid I was, And, I really fell in love with his mark making, the way he seems to kind of draw and paint at the same time, and the way that he infuses a kind of like nervous energy into all of the things that he paints and draws. Something too about this painting in particular that comes through in a lot of my work, I think, is this sort of like center portal. In this one, he has like a gateway to September, so it's almost like the foreground is like late summer, and then through that yellow outline is like the space to come, the season to come. And I think of that kind of portal in between spaces that kind of forms quite naturally in nature. You encounter it if you're looking for it. That's something that speaks to me today. Also, you can see there's like a little praying mantis on the side, which I love. The insertion of like bugs and critters into paintings has always been important to me. He has lots of critters in this one, but you can see that one in a moth. Another artist who's really important to me is Pierre Bonnard, and this composition in particular is really one of my favorites, and I had the wonderful opportunity to finally see it in person this past summer. This is my own photo. It's not as big as I thought it would be, which was shocking, but I had imagined it life-size, as if you could step into the painting. Something about the way Bonnard painted landscapes has always appealed to me, and it appeals to me even more and more all of the time. The way that every landscape seems to convey a mood, and perhaps that's his mood or how he found the mood of that day when he painted it. Something too about this one, how the path leads to this dark space in the center, is very compelling. And, for many years, I thought that dark space was like a doorway through the hedge in the background. And, upon seeing it in real life, I saw that it's actually a tree. It took me a long time to see that. I was so busy seeing all the rest of it. So onward to this like fantasy that all of his paintings are about that weird tree that create this liminal portal. That's my imagining of Bonnard. Maybe that's even more important than the real Bonnard for me. Another artist who I love, sort of a similar era, is Odilon Redon. And something about his work, to me, has always conveyed the spiritual. He worked in gouache oftentimes, and sometimes in oils as well. And, they do seem like drawings with paint. And I love the way that nature seems to like kind of flicker. And, in a lot of his paintings, they're more about like the symbology of of the elements within the painting than it is about like representing an actual space. This painting to me like shows how we don't know what time it is in his work. You know, it could be night, it could be morning. You know, the Buddha is there obviously, but the rest of it is pretty mysterious. And I love that ambiguity. Here's another one of his paintings. His palette to me is just completely divine and is one that I borrow constantly. It's a little bit hardwired in. I've looked at his work for so many years. A more contemporary artist that I'm interested in has been Peter Doig for many, many years. While we have pretty different like ambitions, I think, with our work, the way he paints shapes in nature has always meant a lot to me, and it really looks like the kind of nature that I see. That's kind of how the world looks, is like this. And the shapes the trees create, which to me looks like Birchfield in many ways, there's something about it that kind of conveys the inner life of that landscape. The way he applies paint is also very important to me. You know, between washes and dry brush, passages of very thin paint mixed with passages of thicker paint. There's something about that on the surface of encountering these paintings creates like a lot of like physical vibrancy and also kind of a physical quality to the surface. I think about Ana Mendieta as well. I encountered her work initially when I was in undergrad and when I was studying performance. And this is one of her earliest works that we're aware of from '78 called the Silhouetta series. Ana Mendieta, as a Cuban American, you know, had a lot of sort of visceral interventions with the landscape in her early work. She used her body as part of the work and also sort of brought in her background in Santeria and you know, this portal, it's a portal to me. This body shape is a portal. She did this Silhouetta series with many different landscapes. It ties in also to me with like early American New Age goddess culture, which was very vibrant during the late 60s and 70s and the 90s as well, when I was coming up. As a performer, I modeled a lot of my work after Ana Mendieta, as well as other performance artists of the time, but Ana Mendieta was a main influence, and I ended up studying with her teacher and boyfriend, Hans Brader, when I went to University of Iowa. So I got a really sort of first-hand look at a lot of her early work through the works of hers that he kept in his archive and their collaborations. So I went to Iowa to be near Ana Mendieta, even though she wasn't there anymore. Another influence I have to mention is music. Music is a huge influence in my life, and I listen to music pretty constantly when I'm in the studio, especially music sung by women. And music with beautiful lyrics is really important to me. Poetry is important to me. PJ Harvey's been active since the 90s as well, when I was coming of age, and something about her that was very compelling was the way that, and I shouldn't speak in the past tense because she's still making incredible work, but she uses her voice in a very shamanic way, I believe. And you know, when I was coming up, I started studying witchcraft and shamanism and other types of, you know, what's the word? I don't want to say New Age because it's not. Other types of ancient ways of communicating with the energy and spirit of the world. So I wanted to read you just a few phrases. When I made my notes this morning at 4 a.m., I was like, I want to mention these PJ Harvey lyrics because they come to me all the time. This is from a song called In the Dark Places, and PJ Harvey writes in her songs so much about the earth, and there's so much mention of like plants and soil and trees and mountains. She writes or sings, "In the fields and in the forests, under the moon and under the sun, another summer has passed before us, and not one man has, and not one woman has revealed the secrets of this world." And that song is about like a place where soldiers were buried. So she brings in politics as well and a lot of mourning. And another artist who I love is Michael Armitage, who is a British Kenyan-born artist. And he paints on bark from Kenya. So it's kind of like a paper, but also kind of a hard surface that's textured. I love the way he paints. To me, it is, the way he uses color is just genius, and the way he plants nature and incorporates the figure into the work always just shows to me this sort of way that we are interlaced, humans and the earth. Even while he speaks of things like history and intercultural like clashes, his painterly touch really speaks to me. And it's almost like he's touching the actual thing when he paints. That's something I love to think about. It's like, what if the way you painted this tree was like touching the tree, you know? Another, and I think the last artist I'll talk about is Mama Anderson, who's a Swedish artist. A lot of her subject matter has this sort of psychological resonance, and you know, sometimes she paints things like dolls and the figure, other times she paints these vast sort of dark landscapes. I'm a huge fan and think that her work is just brilliant. Which brings me to some of my work. I want to see how fast I'm talking here. I've got a little time. Okay, so one of the first paintings that I did that's kind of like in the same vein as the work I'm producing now was shown at Bozo Mag in 2019, part of a solo show. And Bozo Mag is a little artist-run space here in the Highland Park area. I did this painting called The River, and it wasn't the first time I had painted the river, nor was it to be the last. This painting was important, I guess, for me to make in retrospect because it contained some of the things that I still bring to my work today, which is really like drawing with paint, rubbing, scrubbing, and like using thin washes as part of the process. This work is a lot dreamier than some of the work I make today, but it was an important moment in my life, both personally and in terms of like my creative life. And you know, it kind of shows like a version of me staying in the water and then a version of me walking away. A kind of transformational, baptismal moment. I'll talk more about the river shortly. Also from that time, Backyard Bath, which is modeled after a Bonnard painting, one of his fabulous bathtub paintings of his wife. And you know, I started becoming really interested during the pandemic. This is a little bit pre-pandemic, but during the pandemic in like how our homes and the nature we create around our homes, or that we, not that we create, but the landscapes and environments that we create in our backyards, if we have them, or in our little yards, whatever they might be, on our decks. They are sort of the places where calm and inner peace can be sought in a pretty, you know, unassuming way, like should we choose to pay attention to them. This was a fantasy of an outdoor bathtub that I wanted to have, and I still will have someday, where you can go outside and fill the bath with water and look at the stars. Like that would be a really wonderful thing. I'm getting there, I'm close, coming close. Another painting from that time was Red Fire, Morning Sun. This was based on some of the landscape of my front yard at the time, and you can see my mimicking of Bonnard's sort of ambiguous space in the center, but then also my interest in starting to like place these items within the yard context in a kind of intentional way. I think of each plant as being like a plate on a table, or like a candle on an altar, or a stone on an altar, a feather on an altar. I had a teacher named Shunasi, who was one of my early witch teachers, who talked about how the earth was the first altar. And this is not her, she didn't come up with this. It's actually, I think, in the Bible. But it was kind of reinterpreted in this feminist sense to talk about how the earth is so sacred that it was the place where everything else, like, was all of the things that had symbolic qualities were placed on the earth. And that brings me to Front Yard Dusk with Visitor from 2020. This was deep in the pandemic, and or deep in the early part of the pandemic, I should say. You can see a person with a mask at the entryway. And this was a painting of my front yard at the house I was living at the time. And you can see the different elements that are placed as if on an altar, the vase and sort of the bowl of water, and then the different plants sort of treated in a way to kind of convey their different personalities. And then the guest or the visitor or the mysterious shadow other, however you want to think of that person, there with the dog, they're sort of peeking in as if they know they maybe can't or shouldn't enter, or maybe they don't want to, maybe they're a threat on the outskirts of that sacred space. That's the kind of ambiguity that I enjoy in a painting. Oh, and then there's my little feet in the foreground with the painted toenails. Just to keep it real. This one is from my first show with Shrine in New York of that same year, named after the Dolly Parton song, "The Sky is Green and the Grass is Blue." It felt like at that moment that the sky was green and the grass was blue. Things felt upside down. And yet, nature can kind of create this sense of being enclosed or held. And that's something I tried to do with the composition, even while it's based on that Bonnard painting that I showed you of the garden, sort of trying to bring everything towards this center point and to kind of hug where the viewer might be standing or hold them. I also added the full moon. Here's another version of that painting. At this point, I wasn't living at that place anymore, but I continued to paint it and think about the strange elements in his painting that I wanted to take, like that strange black kind of craggy plant bug thing in the foreground, which to me is completely fascinating, and I will always think about that weird shape that he painted. And at the time I made that painting, I was living in Brooklyn for a few months after my show there. I had the opportunity to stay in a wonderfully affordable studio because everybody had left the city for the pandemic. And so I had this incredible space, and for the first time in my life, really a lot of time to make paintings. I had only quit my day job about a year before that. And so I was living in Brooklyn with a friend, and our backyard was really dead in terms of, like, it was winter, it was cold, it was frozen, but there was something about it that felt like so much life had been lived in it. And so I painted it as if it was like remembering all of the life that had been there. I always think of landscapes as having memories, and those memories are not all, what's the word, beautiful and awe-inspiring. The memory of the earth holds all of the death and the life that came before us. And so when I think about painting a landscape, I'm sort of scanning it for those clues, like what came here before, who was here before. Certainly before the white people, when we're talking about America. But this particular backyard held like a kind of party feeling to me, and I wanted to convey some of that within this space. And the table in the foreground, sort of an homage to Bonnard compositions where the table with the still life on it takes up so much of the foreground that it almost doesn't make sense. Returning to LA, I started living in this small cottage in South Pasadena, which ended up being the subject matter for many paintings to come. And this one shows my little porch and a skunk with a crescent moon. It was really at this place that I was able to start having some plants, and that was so special to me. Before this, I didn't really have like a yard of my own, and it was so great to have a little yard that was really small, but I could still put like potted plants out. I could, put things in the raised bed. I could arrange things on my little porch and have like a special place to contemplate the day. And that's something, frankly, I usually do in the morning. All of my moons are morning moons, I have to tell you. I'm a very early riser. I'm usually asleep before it gets dark. So this was an actual painting of encountering my neighborhood skunk, who became like this wonderful messenger to me. Skunks to me always have to do with having healthy boundaries, because they're such good markers of their territory. They're like, no, this is my space. You stay away. And so whenever a skunk appears, I'm like, check your boundaries. Like, what's happening? This is how my spirituality works for me. And so the skunk came out one morning, and I had to paint it. She came out a lot of mornings, actually. Here's another painting of the El Centro front yard, and you can see the kind of, like one of our camping chairs is in the front yard, and the awesome old-fashioned hose that I had there with the stripe, as well as the white painted tree, which I learned is to keep the sun off it when it's young to help cool it down. Something that happens more in South America and Mexico than it does in a lot of northern US places. The lemon tree also. And then thinking of this place as being like a place that you would, maybe your beloved person just was sitting in that chair and they've stepped up, they've gone in the house. This is like the place that you hold together and that you like really have the most intimate experiences of life within. Here's the side yard with our cat, Callie, and some little plants I've been trying to propagate. I have cats, 3 cats. I'm off notes, I should look. Yeah. So when I go outside in the morning, I'm also thinking about like the phases of the moon. I'm thinking about the seasons and passing. I'm thinking about the time of day and time passing, really more specifically. And how landscapes really can become these like emotional and psychological self-portraits. In this painting, A Small Path, Gateway to, Every object and plant and tree holds meaning at this point. I've built up like a relationship with these things as I tend them and as I live with them. The passion fruit plant that's growing over the front porch, all of the little succulents I'm trying to grow, and the raised bed, as well as the yellow flowers that came out, the olive tree, the lemon tree in the background, and the path leading to this weird green no man's land / portal to somewhere else. Or maybe portal into something deeper within that space. I always get a little fussy when people are talking about my landscapes and they talk about, like, you're getting this wrong. I like to think of landscapes as a place to be embodied within. I don't want to be in awe, and I don't want to be taken out of my body. I want to be there on the ground. That's really important to me. Here's another version of that painting, Small Path 3 with Callie. And you can see things are growing, things are changing. My mood is changing perhaps, the season is changing. You can see another element I like to include in these like altars are things like this little crescent moon bell thingy hanging. I'm a big fan of lawn art and all the tchotchkes you can find and put into your yard and garden. You know, I love places like Marshall's that have like little cheesy like moon thingies that you can get and hang in your yard. That to me is like just as valuable a thing to put on your altar as anything else. And then here's that same view but with monarchs, and they're kind of hard to see at this scale. I don't even see them here. Okay, here we go. There's one right here. Can you see that? Yeah, there's one right there, and then there's one right there. I had some butterfly attracting plants like milkweed trying to grow in the yard, and I think the butterflies liked them. Slowly I've been learning more and more about gardening and learning about natives and learning about, you know, drought-tolerant plants and how I can make my own garden something that contains these things. With climate change, you know, fully upon us, it feels more and more necessary to pay attention to what we plant in the earth. And this painting is the last morning at El Centro. As I was preparing to move, I felt like I needed one more view of this special place. And you can see my little table and my little outdoor rug over here, where I sometimes had coffee in the morning, one of my little moon hanging thingies, and my plants. This one is morning, I guess. I'm calling it that, but it could be night. I've always been, you know, like a sap, completely in love with the idea that a day is like a lifetime, that morning is like a birth, and that evening is like a death. Some other things I've painted are still lifes of plants and flowers. These were both painted on my old porch at El Centro. And I always think that they're portraits of these plants. They're not still lifes, they're portraits of these plants. There's a big difference. And you might notice as well that all of my large paintings are portrait orientation. It should be said as well that these paintings are big enough at 100 inches by 82 inches that if you were to stand in front of it, my hope is that you feel like you could walk into it. That's the scale. And I want to talk a little bit about Riverwood. I showed you that painting of the river with the two versions of me in it. Riverwood's a place that I visit in Oregon and that I've visited all the summers since I met it in 7th grade. I've swam in this river, except for maybe 2 now. And it's really a sacred place. I've known it through my best friend up there and her family who used to have a cabin up there. And since then, I've known it with her family, her children, my own husband, all of our friends as we grow older. And her father just passed 2 weeks ago, and I was thinking so much about how grateful I was that he introduced us to this place. And shared his love for it, a really deep, relationship with this particular river. So this is a small painting, 12 by 9 inches. Here's a larger painting of that same place, Riverwood 2, and I guess ultimately these paintings of Riverwood in different temperatures or conditions or seasons represent different ways I've known it through the ages. The ages. As if I'm thousands of years old. Riverwood 4 I painted after the really intense fires in Oregon during the I guess it was late 2020. And a lot of the wooded areas around it burnt down. And I visited the river the summer after, it was actually, a few months after it burnt down. And it felt like visiting someone who had died. It felt like this majestic place had lost its face almost. And it took me a couple of years to come back to it and feel like it's really alive again. It is growing back, it's different now, but it will always be this river. I think I owe the river another painting. This is a picture of my dear friend Jenny at the river that summer when we were sitting there and crying on the riverbed, just wondering how it could have happened that this fire had taken out so much of the valley. And changing gears a little bit and beginning to wrap up, I wanted to just show you a few pictures from my show at Bozo Mag in 2022. Again, these are all altars to me, places where I have, come and partaken of community and noticed small things like works of art, specific plants, interesting funky walls, that LA thing. A few other paintings to add to the mix. This new studio altar. I make altars all over my studio. That's a part of my religion, you could say, is making altars. And I try to make new altars for every season to kind of express what I long for and some of the things I hope that will be tended to during that time. And then things that come back again and again every season, reliably. This cyclamen, I like to plant, sometimes I like to paint plants before I plant them in my yard. So this cyclamen is an example of that. And I think I'm running out of time, so I'm just gonna touch on, oh, she's like, no. Okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do a little fast. From my last show, my last solo show at Night Gallery, I did a residency at a place called Laguna Castle. That is an intentional community in Echo Park, where artists and activists have lived since the 70s. And I had the opportunity to stay in the apartment of the intentional community's founder. Her name was Isa. And she was very active in political activism, like she worked for the Black Panther Party. She did a lot of work with the city on like keeping Echo Park a good place to live, including not just the environment, but also for the gay queer community. So I got to live in her room for a few days right after she passed. Really, it was only a few weeks after. And she'd been there since the 70s. So painted some of her objects that to me felt like little altars. Her necklaces were one. She had collected them for decades. People gave them to her on special occasions. I painted the view from her room, which had its own little altar on the windowsill. She had little objects everywhere that she had collected from her travels all over the world. And I thought about how she woke up every day and saw this beautiful tree for decades. My friend Martin lives there. I painted his porch, where he and his husband live. I painted some of the gardens at Laguna Castle, including this terrace path leading to one of the apartments. The shade path behind Issa's apartment, which is now, I just visited there a few weeks ago, and it's being changed into a completely different thing, and now I have to paint it again. All of the trees they cut back, and they're creating another little space to hang out with tables. So I need to paint it again. In this painting, you see that the cat that lived on the property curled up, but modeled after my own Donna. And I think I'll end with this one. I also painted my folks' house because this show really had me thinking a lot about death and the way we leave legacies with the places we leave behind and how those places contain so much within them. It also made me think a lot about life and the really beautiful, full lives that my folks live and still live in this place. I was thinking a lot about how I want to tend to this place and hopefully keep it something that can be a part of our family. And you'll notice it's a little hard to see here, but there's a spider overlapping the door frame, and that's exactly how I saw it when I took some of the pictures that I ended up basing this painting on. I was walking with my dad and their dog, and was taking all these photos, and I looked and I was like, oh my God, there's this perfect orb weaver web and spider sitting in the center of this web right over the door frame. Like, how, that's a painting, that has to be a painting. So I included it, and my dad had to fix this gate a few months ago. It fell down in a storm. And that's the kind of thing I love to include. It feels just as sacred as anything. Thank you.
I wanted to start off by, this is almost like a comment, but it's interesting. I think, we've done several of these here at this point, and I don't think anyone has spent so much time talking about their influences. It's just something that it was interesting. It's kind of, I liked it. It was very generous, I mean, a lot of times people maybe don't want to foreground their influences so much for a variety of reasons, or maybe even subconsciously. But I guess I was wondering, can you talk a little bit about that? Why you make it so much a part of your talking about the work to talk about these influences that you have?
Well, thank you for saying it's generous.
It is.
I don't know.
It's honest, too.
It was to not talk about myself the whole time in part. But also, I feel like I've been taught that none of us come from nothing, and that our lineages as artists are long and come, we stand on the shoulders of giants kind of idea. And so, yeah, that's it. Like, who would I be without these painters? I wouldn't be a painter, probably, you know.
Mhm. Yeah, it's also interesting, you know, I never really, so I've known Hayley a long time, we've known each other a long time, I've written about your work before, and I've known your practice for a long time. I've never really thought about your work in the sense of being, like, specifically American. But when you mentioned, I don't know exactly what you said, but you mentioned something about that, and now I really can see it. And which is funny, because a lot of your influences were like European, you know, I mean, it wasn't, you know, there's definitely a lot of ties to Impressionism and all this other stuff. But I kept thinking about people like Henry David Thoreau, or like Emerson, or American like naturalists, kind of. Do you think about those people at all, or?
I was raised by a mother who loved those folks. So those books are in our house, and
What's the Thoreau one?
Walden Pond.
Yeah.
Yeah, my folks love those folks. So I grew up knowing a lot about them, and I think there's even like a Thoreau poster somewhere in the house. Yeah, I mean, I was aware of them. They're not my favorite people to read. You know, I think more about like Rebecca Solnit in terms of like an American environmental spiritual sort of writer.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I wanted to touch on, is that you talk about the spiritual a lot in your work. I actually also wrote about your work in terms of the spiritual ones.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's funny, this is sort of a funny question to ask you, but do you do a lot of meditation outside too? No.
No, I don't like meditation, but I've tried at various points in my life. I think of walking as a meditation when I walk, and I think of painting as a meditation, so I feel like I spend a lot of my time in meditation, more of a moving meditation, but I've never been someone to do like sitting meditation. To me that feels, this is weird to say, but it has always felt very patriarchal, to be like, sit down and be quiet. Like, no. I don't know. It comes from, you know, the tradition comes from some patriarchal religions, so I'll say that, or some of the traditions of meditation do. I don't know. I think of being in nature as being a meditation. Like gardening is a meditation, walking slowly through nature is a meditation, sitting and looking at trees is a meditation.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I mean, I feel like you alluded to this a little bit in what you were saying during your presentation, but it seems almost like there's kind of an anti-transcendental transcendentalism in some of your work, you know?
I'll take it.
Yeah, like, I mean, like, in the sense that transcendental, or like, sometimes literally, or sometimes in a more figurative sense, usually has to do with like this concept of circumventing or ascending from your current circumstances in one way or another, right? So there is this sort of idea of going spiritually deeper in your work, but it is not about escaping.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One of the most beautiful spiritual practices I was ever taught was laying on the earth, and it's basically, I mean, it could be called a meditation. You lay first on your stomach on the earth, silently, your legs and arms outstretched, face to the ground, and then you lay opposite, looking up at the sky for a while, and then you go back and face the ground. And that is an action that I think can carry so much meaning, you know? I mean, yeah.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about, I mean, that's a really interesting action. It kind of points a little bit to, I wouldn't necessarily think of your work as like, it's not personal in the sense of autobiographical in the way some people's work is. Do you know what I mean? It's not sort of an expose of some sort of issue or thing that's going on in your life. But it's very personal in a very sort of like subtle way. I mean, they're all places that you are living in. I mean, it actually kind of reminds me again of like a lot of impressionists, you know, or like even classically like Van Gogh. Like it's a lot of places where it's like, I am sitting here and this is what I am painting, like the thing that I am in.
Yeah.
And this is also knowing your work from the paintings previous to this. Those work, I forget exactly what you called them. They were the series where like it was like every morning you would do something. They were sort of like personal in the same way too, because it would be like, it was almost as if it's like immediate. You know, there's a sense of kind of personal immediacy. Not necessarily, what's that word? It starts with a C, when something's, when you're sort of spilling things out. I don't know, I can't think of the word. But it is, I don't know, could you talk a little bit more about how you place those like subtle personal maneuvers into your work?
Yeah, they're pretty much the whole armature, you know? It's like that's the machine that gives me the ideas of what to paint, is how I, you know, encounter things in the world. So this is how I never run out of things to paint, is I paint like what's right there. It's my little side yard with the cat, you know, it's the bird I see on the path, you know. It had to be like the everyday for me to have it be interesting. I'm a kind of boring person, you know. I like to do the same thing over and over again, and I don't like to really go places that much. I like to be home and with my things and my cats and my plants, and that's the stuff that means everything to me, and I feel like that's the stuff that conveys the most to me as well.
Yeah, I mean, you can really see it in the difference between you and someone like Peter Doig, where like I definitely don't get the sense that like he's painting something he's seeing every day, or that's like part of his everyday life, which isn't bad or good. It's just I don't get that sense from his work. But with your work, I definitely get the sense of like the special, like a moment of meaning with the quotidian. You know?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I get the sense that that's how you're experiencing it. Somehow that translates into the painting.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask a little bit, I guess maybe this goes in line with what you were talking about in terms of painting what's in front of you, or even the sense of being almost like a repetitive person. Like, it does seem like you paint sometimes in motifs. You know, that you'll get this sort of thing of like, this is what's holding the painting in this moment. And then maybe another thing will hold it in another moment. So would you say that that's accurate?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, those are different altars. So every yard can be an altar. And I'm working on a yard right now that is in a different location, and I'm planting things and sort of cultivating that space to be a new container for the seasons and light and, you know, sacred moments, really. It's a moon garden.
I like that all of your moons are morning moons. It's very sweet. There's something, like, it's a really nice moon.
Oh, yeah, it's really nice at that time. It's so quiet.
I still can't believe you get up so early. She gets up really early. Okay, well, I guess I wanted to also ask you about how much horticulture you've learned, like in doing this kind of work.
I'm a baby. I'm a baby. You know, it's. I don't want to call it a hobby because I'm very serious about it, but I think we all probably are very serious about our hobbies. It's, you know, I'm learning piece by piece, and I sort of go to it like a like a desperate person looking for, like, I don't know, I was gonna say a drink. I'm sober, so that's funny. Like, I go to the garden because I need the garden. And I always want my relationship with it to be like an emotional replenishment beyond like an educational experience. So I learn a few things and then I implement them, but all of my attempts to like do more serious study are thwarted by the fact that I actually need to be painting and not taking classes on, indigenous plants. But I have been learning through, especially a really great group called the Hardy Californians. They've been really helpful in teaching me about what should be growing here in California as the climate changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, actually, I mean, maybe I'll even finish this up with an observation on your work throughout time. One thing that is really true is that your work always has a kind of authenticity in the sense that, like, whatever you're painting, you're really into. Do you know what I mean? Like, I've never seen Hayley paint something she wasn't totally enraptured in, whether that be cats or gardens or emotions or lots of things.
Thank you.
Yeah. But I think with that, maybe we can turn it over and see if there are any questions out there in the big white audience world.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for sharing with us of that beautiful work and
My pleasure.
ideas. Is there, I know your gardens are very personal to you, and that's why and they're an altar and they're spiritual to you. But is there out there a garden in your, a garden that you might know about or have seen that you would like to go and paint? Like a botanical garden? I mean, maybe not because yours are so personal, your own garden is so personal to you.
It's more, I love botanical gardens and love to visit them, but the ones I want to paint are the ones that are the most awkward to ask to paint. Like, there's a house about 2 blocks from where we live, and they have the most incredible yard sculptures, as well as a ton of like container plants. And I love how they tend to it, whoever lives there. I like monitor it for changes and document it, and take a lot of pictures when I can, surreptitiously. And yeah, I mean, it's always like the yard of a stranger that I'm like, oh, something very interesting is happening here. The person that lives here loves it, and they spend a lot of time thinking about how to like design it, and that feels really meaningful, And then when I visit it over and over again on my walks, it becomes something I get to know too, and then I really want to bother them, knock on the door, and I've come so close. Yeah, haven't done it yet though.
Do you do commissions on other people's gardens? Like if someone hired you to paint their...
I've been asked, but I haven't done it. Yes?
How long do you spend on one painting?
Oh, as long as I have. They take longer than anyone wants me to take on them. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the size, but on the big ones, it's usually at least a few months process, like getting the painting kind of organized, and from finding the subject matter to the photos to the drawing to actually making the painting, and then the painting itself takes weeks and weeks and sometimes months, depending.
Your work is amazing.
Oh, gosh, thanks. Hey, yes.
I'll ask a connected question and one other side question, but thank you so much for showing your work. All of the references made sense to me, when looking at, knowing a little bit about your work. But the color, like I can see the references at times, in the color, but it seems so personal, and I'm just curious, and also so refined in many ways, or in all ways. I'm just curious how you explore color, how you come up with the palettes, because they're just so sophisticated on landscapes, yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I don't know how I come up with them. You know, I wasn't like formally trained as a painter, so I feel like I come at it from this like weird backwards way. I don't really always understand how you're supposed to start a painting, I guess, is kind of where it comes from, and it's been just like through a process of intuitive searching and trial and error, you know, so yeah, it's, I don't know, I have a little bit of synesthesia, so when I have memories of a place, it's always like color-based. So that's where a lot of the color comes from, and like feelings have colors. So that's where a lot of it comes from. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
And I was gonna say, how early do you wake up?
Like 4. It's not that early. Yeah. Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I love that reference of laying in the ground, laying on the ground. Because whenever I travel anywhere, I always take my shoes off when I land in a new place and put my feet in the earth where I'm at.
That's beautiful.
And it actually, I learned that long ago because it actually helps with jet lag. You root yourself into the soil, and you have to actually be barefoot. And so I kind of get that sense of your work that there is that. I love that you talked about the memory of who was there, or the spirits of who were there, and that the color is actually bringing them to life. And I think that could really see that in the works that you did after the fire of the landscape memorial. It totally makes sense, and so it's very powerful.
Thank
I love
you.
your work. I've never seen one, so
Oh,
I have to
gosh.
see them now.
Next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that hot tip too. Yes.
I was going to ask, I think it was the painting in 2019 where it was like the 2 versions of you, one in the river, one leaving the river. You mentioned it was like kind of a big turning point in your life. It was not personal. Like what was that turning point? Was it like on a personal level? Was it for your art? It seemed like your style almost started to shift.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about this. I got sober, so that changed kind of everything. Yeah, I was able to, like, quite literally see more clearly. Yeah, that's changed how I approach making work, as well as, you know, how I live my life. Yeah. Yeah. Pretty grateful for that. Yes.
I mean, obviously, I'm sure other people have said that, but, I mean, even this painting, I mean, I could see you, do you ever work in pastel?
Yeah, I did for a long time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I love pastels, yeah.
All right, I think that's a good place for us to wrap up. Thank you so much, Hayley. Let's give her one more round. And thank you everyone for coming. Also come back, it's the last 2 weeks that are the run of the show. It's about time. And then next month, we will have another Art Talk Tuesday with Ray Anthony Barrett. And
He's a good friend. He's amazing. You should come see him.
yeah, so come back and